do not know what, oh, okay. I don't know what faith group you belong to.
I belong to the Friends of the IARF. I think I joined your Facebook of the IARF US chapter. I think I joined already.
Start. Maybe
Wonderful.
let's now
Okay.
start.
Yes.
Okay.
When do you start?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think
Welcome,
we'll
welcome,
begin.
yeah.
We hope others will continue to join us. This is the next to the last of our ones for 2024. And we're very happy to have both Betsy Darr, our scribe and former president, and Christine Patch-Lindsay to talk to us about combining Unitarian Universalism and is it fair me to say neo-paganism, or how would you like to describe yourselves?
Yeah,
I think neo-pagan is the correct term.
Yeah.
All right.
No direct lineage from ancient or pre-Christianity to how pagans currently practice, because it was an oral tradition and it was lost, particularly during the burning times. And so we all acknowledge that we're just recreating it based on knowledge of what we do know of early practices, but we really don't know what people did back then. So it's a living tradition.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
well,
shall I
let
start,
Betsy and
John?
Christine
Yeah.
take over.
Okay, so I'm going to start, and I'm going to start by tracing some of the history of how I became a pagan. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. Two events occurred in the late 70s when I was in my early 30s, and I was a fairly new member of Unitarian Universalism. I was also the religious education coordinator for my congregation, First UU Society of San Francisco. One event was an invitation to view a slide presentation of ancient goddess art from around the Middle East and Egypt, with goddesses as figures of power in contrast to Christian statuary depicting women as mothers and martyrs. I learned that the goddesses were the most revered deities in many places and for a long time, and apparently greatly influenced these cultures. The second event was a meeting of the Women's Society of our congregation, a chapter of the UU Women's Federation. It was a kind of turning point for me. In our meetings, we were, among other things, exploring aspects of the burgeoning women's liberation movement and women's spirituality, how they could and did influence our lives. An aspect of it that rather surprised me was that our religion, even ours, demeaned women, if only by leaving them out of pulpits, of words in the hymnal, in biblical interpretation, and more. One evening, the witch Starhawk was invited to explain neo-paganism and to give us a taste of its practices and spirituality. Suddenly, I found it challenging me. The biggest draw to the UU Church for me was that one is empowered and encouraged to follow one's own experience-based beliefs. I understood this as, I won't ever be asked to say or act upon something that I don't believe, as the Apostles' Creed had become in my Protestant background. Now I was being asked to stand in a tree-like position and feel the energy of the earth flowing into me through my roots. At first, I stood there stuck because this was something I did not believe. And then I decided to go along with the others as I realized that it couldn't do any harm. And I found that I did feel it, though I understood that was a figment of my imagination. Gradually, it dawned on me that participating in a metaphor was a valid form of religious participation and did not violate my favorite UU principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So then feminist spirituality in that decade, I would say, became a big movement within the UU denomination. Shirley Rank and Liz Fisher wrote curricula for women's groups on the goddesses who have inspired so many, the Middle Eastern, Near Eastern ones, as well as from other cultures around the world. They were very popular at the First Unitarian of San Francisco and with other UU congregations. In this milieu, a few women I know decided to form a group to further practice women's spirituality and invited me and some others to join it. I did join, and after a few formation meetings,
There's a Motorola.
we became Spiritual Seasons, a group
Oh, John is there. Good.
met in each other's Sunday evening. Most of the participants were members of our church. We had in common that much of our spiritual inspiration came from nature and the turning seasons, with a lot of moral and ethical guidance from our church, but the spirituality we maybe found in nature more. This was definitely true for me, a transplant from the East Coast who missed the marked changes of seasons I had experienced there. We were not sure what our meetings would eventually look like, but a couple of women had found books like Barbara Walker's Women's Rituals, a source book. We started there. Some of us read Starhawk's The Spiral Dance, and we began to call the directions and cast a circle to contain our personal sharing. The 6-week intervals fit well with the sabbats of the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, so those celebrations often provided inspiration for our evenings. We created our own traditions too. We always celebrated Yule at Roberta's home, and from there walked out to Tank Hill, a windy spot in the middle of San Francisco, where we sang and held up candles and soda bottle lanterns while experiencing whatever we had in the way of wintry weather. But I treasured this group of about 20 plus women, many of whom were youngish parents like me, others beloved elders who showed us paths to follow, and other of random ages. I don't know about other UU pagans, but I have always been a naturalistic pagan, understanding the god and goddess, the spirits of the 4 directions, and other spirits as symbolic, as metaphors for the spiritual awareness that I want to nurture in my life. It was likely the same for most of the others in spiritual seasons. So in the meantime, another pagan, explicitly Wiccan group had arisen in the San Francisco church, growing out of an adult religious education course on Wiccan paganism offered by people who were members of both the congregation and the Reclaiming Collective of Pagans. After a couple of iterations, it became the Pagan Interest Circle. It still, over 30 years later, meets every month on the Saturday evening closest to the full moon. I think I attended occasionally, even while I was a member of Spiritual Seasons, but since leaving it, I have been a regular member of PICT. So PICT is a very different group, open to all genders, all generations. We had children in our meetings for quite a number of years, affiliated with the church or not, some committed, some drop-ins. Our rituals take place in a circle of chairs around an altar to the center or spirit, usually in the church's interfaith chapel, almost always in the chapel. Altars for the 4 directions interrupt the circle at the cardinal points. The format is similar to that of Spiritual Seasons, a set of opening rituals and closing rituals with the work in the middle. In Spiritual Seasons, the work usually took the form of each woman sharing feelings and thoughts about a named topic related to the seasonal celebration. In PICT, the core of the ritual is much more varied and rarely includes personal sharing, which demands a high level of trust, and we have a very open, fluid combination of people attending each time. So the attraction for me of PICT was that our ritual gatherings are quite imaginative and active, making stone soup in September, weaving flower garlands in May, doing an activity suggested by a story, or a spiritual cleansing of the church with ritual brooms. That is one reason I became a regular. I'm a very head-centered, word-oriented person, and I realized it could enhance my skills in religious education to experience, that is, invoke the spiritual through the senses, hearing a flute, handling and holding things, smelling evergreens as we handle them, and lighting candles. We sing or chant, but rarely read any text in our rituals, and I have found it uplifting, spiritual, and sometimes deeply touching. And I almost always come home in a better mood than I went there.
Mhm.
So how does this relate to the rest of my UU congregation and my Unitarian Universalism? As I've explained, this affiliation in spiritual practice has simply broadened my experience as a UU. I do not find any conflict with Unitarian Universalism, which has principles but no creed. One principle is to find your own way in religion, based in truth as life has shown it to you. There is a nationwide pagan body called CUPS, Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, that holds all of the congregation-based chapters together and helps give us credibility. At my church, pagans are involved in several ways in the life of the rest of the congregation. We have traditionally created a Sunday morning Yule program for the children once each year. And there are or have been similar Sundays for Hanukkah and Advent. We invite all the congregation to our annual Yule celebration evenings and our Beltane, that is May Day, afternoons. Depending on the year and the lead minister, pagan elements have been included in Sunday services for Halloween and Day of the Dead. PIC's tradition of creating a display for the honored dead at that time of year, inviting people to bring in photos of them, has been adopted as a congregation-wide practice. I have always found that my pagan practice blends very well with the rest of my experience in a UU congregation. Christine, would you like to tell us something about how you came into paganism?
Yes, and I thank you very much, Betsy, for inviting me as a guest today, and all of you having me here. And I'm thrilled to share my story. I am a UU, a member of the Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, as well as a practicing pagan, and my religious identities are intertwined. So this is my story. I am an activist. Whatever my interest, I must be fully engaged. And my spirituality and practice of religion is no different. Even as a child, I wanted to participate in the Roman Catholic Mass in the same role as an altar boy, but was rejected for being a girl. I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church, but I found no place for me in its teachings and expectations of Catholic womanhood. I was certain that religion needed to be part of my daily life and that practicing religion should grow my spirit. But my family's faith kept making me feel smaller and my spirit stifled. So at age 15, I experienced a spiritual crisis, found the strength within me to leave the church, entered an existential void, and realized I needed to create my own structure for making meaning out of life. My solace was time spent in the woods, on the beach, or hiking in wild places. This has always been my church, the place where I experience the holy, where spirit is eminent, where I feel connected to all of life. Beauty, as the indigenous peoples say. In college, I explored other church denominations and to my dismay came to the conclusion that I wasn't a Christian at all, which was very confusing as I still had a good relationship with Jesus and still do to this day. I practiced hatha yoga and meditation. I checked out the Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and even found a spiritual teacher for a time, but nothing fit. I fashioned my own spiritual practice and discovered I have a talent for creating personal rituals, which I did often. So I became a peace activist against the Vietnam War, then years later in San Francisco, promoted the bilateral nuclear freeze policy when first strike nuclear weapons were being proposed. I noticed that what motivated me to engage in social justice work and political action was a response to my belief system and not a reactionary rage that I found in so many other people. I identified my motivation as a religious response, and to protect myself from burnout, centered my work with Unitarian Universalists. Concurrently, my religious focus shifted away from God the Father to a search for God the Mother. I found a notice posted on community bulletin board for an open ritual celebrating the goddess on a full moonlit night that entailed climbing down a cliff on a precarious and dangerously narrow trail to Baker Beach. I have participated in a few other public events where women came together and experimented with ritual outside under the sky. I began to identify as pagan because I am in love with and worship the natural world and all of creation. The very first time I walked into the doors of UUSF, I connected with women who invited me to join Tapestry, a women's spirituality group of UU and female ministers and laywomen. They met over in Berkeley and they were dedicated to discovering and learning about the goddess and her many names, and to consciously call her back into our Western culture, our country, our homes, and our hearts. We did ritual in a circle, the way we thought women who practiced the old religion in Europe did it before the spread of Christianity. We really did not know what we were doing. And I continued to be an activist. In 1982, I participated in civil disobedience at the Lawrence Livermore Labs, a direct action planned over the span of a year by a large coalition of well-organized, nonviolent affinity groups of protesters called the Livermore Action Group, or LAG, using a pure consensus model as a decision-making. The purpose was to disrupt the normal workday of the lab employees who were working on developing first-strike nuclear weapons. So I sat down in the street with my affinity group in an act of civil disobedience, clutching civil disobedience by Thoreau, as I recall, and was arrested, one of 1,500 people over a 2-day period. It was there in jail that I first met Starhawk, a witch who had in 1979 published the first book that I had read about ritual and witchcraft, The Spiral Dance. I was thrilled to see in words what I have always known, that the earth and all of creation is sacred and connected. I loved learning the practices of an earth-based religion. I was enthralled by her descriptions of the pagan god and goddess, and there are many aspects, there are many names. I absorbed her description of real magic and practiced the given exercises to change my consciousness. In her book, Starhawk articulated and put into context many of my own experiences with ritual. I learned the mechanics of physical manifestation as an act of consciousness. I experienced the power, my power, of intentionally directing my will. Now, I was fascinated by Starhawk's use of ritual and magic as an activist tool. Starhawk and her coven were based in the San Francisco Bay Area and formed a coalition of pagans practicing Wicca called the Reclaiming Collective. Reclaiming offers pagan ritual and elements of magic classes, as well as collectively planning public rituals celebrating the solar holidays on what some pagans call the Wheel of the Year. The most well-known of these rituals happens at Samhain, called the Spiral Dance. My first experience of the Spiral Dance was in that jail setting, Camp Parks, a locked wooden gymnasium that contained 600 women. Starhawk initiated the Spiral Dance to counter a horrific incident perpetuated by some reckless women who endangered the safety and solidarity of the entire captive community. The power and effectiveness of that ritual will always stay with me. Shortly thereafter, in 1983, I became a Unitarian Universalist and a member of the UUSF Society. I could embrace a community whose covenant began with the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and ended with the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I could resonate with the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. At UUSF, I then taught a class with Liz Fisher introducing the goddess using a beta version of UU Minister Reverend Shirley Rank's curriculum, Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And for years, I participated in the Sunday morning UU service as a worship associate. In 1994, some UUS members, also members of Reclaiming, started a Sunday morning discussion group to explore paganism. I became a member when I participated in their first public ritual, Summer Solstice, in collaboration with 2 Bay Area UU congregations. In 1996, the Pagan Interest Circle had a charter with the UUSF Board of Trustees to become a recognized church group and chapter organization of the newly formed National Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, or CUPS. Since then, the group has had several different pagan-themed programs, but has consistently offered a safe space for monthly full moon open rituals, now close to 30 years. I am still active with the Pagan Interest Circle. As I have said before, I am an activist. As a pagan, I am my own priestess. The spiritual practice of being a pagan requires that I engage in a ritual act. Whether alone or in a circle, there are only participants in a pagan ritual. To do ritual is to engage my senses as well as my mind, to become sensitive to the flow and flavors of different energies and learn how to work with them. To do ritual is to increase my power and sharpen my concentration, to discipline my mind. To do ritual is to claim my power to set intentions and charge these intentions with the energy of action. This is the magic. This is how I ready myself to have agency in my sacred physical world. I am an activist, a pagan, a Unitarian Universalist witch.
Thank you both for wonderful presentations. We have plenty of time for questions and discussion from all of those in attendance. And I welcome people. Hold up your hand or just start talking, I guess.
Go off. We actually want to have a little bit of give and take between ourselves before we get to that. And we won't
Please,
we'll only take a
good.
few
I'm
minutes.
so
for
glad.
that. Okay.
Good.
Okay, great. So I'm going to say again that I'm a naturalistic pagan, and what I understand as God is the miracle of the unfolding of the universe. But the goddesses, and I said that part already too. So I focus on I meditate on certain goddess figures or images to develop certain aspects of spirituality, and having a personification of them really helps me, such as if I do my morning ritual of raising my hands to the goddess Amaratas, whoops, I usually can say her name, but not today, the Japanese goddess of the sun. And Amaterasu, thank you. And then bend down as far as I can toward the earth to show my gratitude to Gaia for what she provides. So I could just say, oh, sun and earth, but it feels richer if I use the goddess names. And I can delve into myth to deepen my responses. Now, Christine, I think maybe you have a somewhat different understanding of deity.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything about that?
It's a little bit more experiential and maybe not quite as specific. I am very sensitive and I work with energy. And I call using the names of gods or goddesses. And sometimes the energies just come to me and I can perceive a name for them. For the work I want to do to help me in my life. Sometimes they come unbidden, but there's specific feeling or energetic signature, so to speak, in the unseen world that I experience. And so it's not a belief system for me. I really don't have, I'm not very pragmatic. I don't really believe in anything, but I'm open to all possibilities. And so sort of the best way to um, present my understanding.
Well,
So like it's and that it's more of an energetic signature, I would say,
okay.
that I
Well,
put name to.
we're more alike than I had realized before we started conversing about this. I know you've led a couple of sort of magical rituals that have been very interesting and had like that time that we all sprayed water from spray bottles and sang singing in the rain, and then
It
that
rains.
because we wanted so badly for it to rain more that the winter that was coming, and it did.
Yeah,
So,
it rains.
um, but you've kind of answered my next question, so I'll skip to this one. Just take a minute or two for it. Um, we've used the terms witch and Wiccans. Can you kind of can you differentiate those two terms?
Sure. I
Probably
think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the terms. Um, Not all pagans are witches. Okay. There's many flavors of paganism, and it's a huge umbrella. Witches is a subset of that, in that what's common to all witches, I believe, is that we believe in the divine presence in the world and in ourselves and in other people, and that it's a deeply personal spirituality. And I would also say it involves the practice of moving beyond and acknowledge and not just merely acknowledging that there are spiritual nuances that exist in the universe, but that we become active participants in their arrangement. And that is we call that the practice of magic.
Mm-hmm.
And magic is a tool. It can be used for good or ill, but there are many flavors of witchcraft as well. Wiccan is just one. I don't particularly identify as Wiccan, or neither does Starhawk, though interesting, a lot of people in the Reclaiming Collective do. There are druids, there are people who follow a Norse tradition. There's, like, I consider myself an eclectic witch and a very Unitarian Universalist fashion. I draw on different traditions and seek to know more about what other people are doing. And as I said, it's a living tradition. It grows. Some pagans or witches work with a specific set of deities, and others don't.
Like us, yeah.
So I
Okay.
don't know if that answers your question or not,
Yeah.
but if
I think so. I'll just mention, I understand that the Wiccan tradition is trying to build on whatever little bits we know about Celtic pagan practices.
it is, and it's drawn. Witchcraft actually became active in England by, I forget his first name, but a man named Gardner. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of references to Gardnerian witchcraft that formed covens and were closed. And then one of his followers had it called, last name was Alexander, was Alexandrian witchcraft. And that started in as recently as 1950, when the witchcraft laws banning and persecuting witches in Britain were repealed.
Mhm.
So then he came up and he basically made it up. He took from a whole lot of things, and that's sort of the structure that is the basis for what most pagan witches use today.
Okay. Okay. So I'd like to move on to the question. So do you have any closing, anything you want to say in closing before they do that, or we do that, or should we just open it up?
I think we can open it up.
Okay, great. Great. Hope somebody has a question.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a question and a comment, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
The comment is
Right.
that my last 10 years of active ministry was in Jacksonville, Florida. And they had a very active pagan group. It grew a lot in my 10 years there. It was quite diverse. I had a man who ancestors had been Polish pagans back several centuries. And
Mm,
actually, the rest of the group, most of whom were neo-pagan and had chosen their identities, didn't have any ancestral connection with paganism, found him a little difficult because he very definitely had, a whole tradition that he was part of, that he
mm,
had learned as a child. Uh, and he was very
mm,
excited to be part of the group, but I don't think the group ever handled him very well. I mean, I don't think
mm,
they could quite deal with him because he, it was sort of like, often in Unitarian churches, if somebody walks in wearing a cross and carrying a Bible and dressed for church, they're too well dressed for a lot of Unitarian churches, and uh, and then the open religious symbols, whether they're Jewish or Christian, and prayer books and so on, scares some of the other people. And I think that he actually sort of scared them, and he was a
mm,
somewhat introvertish, isolated man, and so I think he didn't end up being as active in the group as I think he hoped he could be.
mm,
I
mm,
also had an entire family. Uh, the man was professional military, and I actually went with him to his military headquarters over the border in Georgia uh, to support his uh, freedom to practice paganism openly as an active
mm.
military, and were able to carry that through. They were raising their child as a pagan, and the family participated regularly. So a lot of the rest of the group were uh, single people. Majority were women, I think, and it also seemed to attract many of, not all, but many of the active lesbians in the congregation. And I don't know how uh, mm, how often that is true. Do you think, in your experience with pagan groups, that it's particularly attractive to GBLTQ people, or particularly less active lesbians, or is that just incidental, just like any other part of the Unitarian congregations?
I can answer that. I think it is very much connected to the belief system of pagans. Pagans um, are open and accepting, and because we honor and perceive the divinity in everyone and everything, it's similar to use, the dignity and respect of all peoples. And so there's a large number of maybe an outsized number compared to the normal population of LGBT plus people and trans people that are attracted to pagan circles. And especially mostly in the younger generation, I would say, but they all seem to be so gender fluid anyway.
Mm.
So it's interesting, but yes, there's definitely we are a paganism is a sanctuary for a community of people who aren't welcome in other religious traditions, but they're welcome in paganism and
And you in general.
Unitarian Universalism as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it made a big difference in the Jacksonville congregation that I was. I didn't go every time they had a ritual, but I did participate periodically with them, and I think that was reassuring to them. I think I was the first of their ministers to do that. And they also asked the board of the congregation to allow them to make one of these uh, now I'm not thinking of the word, these rock circles that you walk that
Labyrinth,
Christian churches have.
labyrinth.
Yeah.
Labyrinth, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and they did that, and I don't know whether it's still being used, but it was developed while I was there, and
Mhm.
and I think became an important thing for them.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting to hear that much detail about another one, and I understand the challenge of somebody coming in who has a tradition should be practiced a certain way. That would be
Yeah,
challenging.
that was a striking experience for me because I had, uh, I certainly had people say who had probably ancestral Celtic roots or other roots, but they had gone through a whole period of Christian denominations or whatever that in many cases they rejected to come to Unitarianism, and so they didn't naturally kind of go back to that as a part of their tradition. But
I do want to add that I'm not surprised. Um, Paganism and witchcraft haven't disappeared, even though there's, as I said, it's an oral tradition. It had been preserved in families, and I've met many people and families, and they're still very closed because it was never safe
mhm,
to
yeah.
practice.
Mhm.
And so yeah, there are strong traditions within families, but it's their family tradition. Like I said, it's very specific to them, but it would still fall under. And there's a whole tradition in this country of what was called cunning man, folk medicine and folk magic and folklore, and just even in the Christian communities, which is it's a form of paganism, but it was masked because it was hidden. It's still not safe in many areas to come out as a pagan, or even myself. I didn't call myself a witch until maybe I don't know, maybe the past 8 years or so. I kind of evolved into one. I didn't choose to be a witch, but I realized I met the definition of one, checked off all the boxes, and I wouldn't feel safe calling myself a witch outside of the Bay Area, and maybe this group and some others.
Mm. Stephen.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. I wanted to speak about the issue of Christianity in this country and particularly the fundamentalist, the Roman Catholic treatment of women and the treatment of LGBT people within Christianity that I believe neo-paganism and Buddhism offered an alternative that was not judgmental. When I had a Buddhist district in Philadelphia, we had 200 members coming to our monthly meeting. Half of the members were LGBT. And all of them, men and women, were there because they had either been kicked out of the Christian communities and their families, and they found a non-judgmental home within Buddhism. And I suspect that it's the very same thing within neo-paganism, that why would you want to be somewhere that you're not wanted to begin with? So I can certainly understand where neo-paganism was a safe home, just like Buddhism, aside from those American converts who brought their homophobia along with them when they became leaders within the Buddhist group. But I was not one of them. Spoke out about it. But at any rate, I see that as a very strong factor. And I'm also so interested. I have always perceived Buddhism as being both humanistic and earth-centered, human-centered. And Betsy, you mentioned the issue of metaphor. that, you know, within Buddhism, there are the four gods of the directions, north, south, east, and west, that we celebrate the solstices, we celebrate, you know, the equinoxes, that very much gods and goddesses exist. I tend not to be an anthropomorphizer. So for me, within Buddhism, we have the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas that to me are iconic bodhisattvas, such as Kuan Yin as a perfect example. I don't visualize some woman floating through the universe answering people's prayers, but I believe very strongly in what that metaphor of Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara stood for, and that recognized that we're all energy beings.
Mhm.
That's the great equalizer for us, for the rocks, for the birds, for our planet, for the universe. We're all energy beings. So I certainly relate with the issue of doing a ceremony for the rain and having it start raining, because I've seen that with 1,500 people going to a ceremony where it was raining like hell, and 1,500 of us standing outside chanting for the rain to stop so that they could do the groundbreaking for a new temple. And I swear, it's like suddenly the clouds, it was like something from the Ten Commandments. The clouds just parted, the sun came out. We did the groundbreaking. The high priest was happy as a lark. And then as soon as it was over, the clouds came back in again. So, I really relate to the interconnected web, to the fact that I and my environment are inseparable. So I relate very, very much to the ideas that underpin neo-paganism. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks.
Reverend Maruta, do you think in Japan there are pagans?
Well, I think that lots of religious communities in Japan. So I don't know what is the authentic religion. I think that the pagans are not authentic as it were. So in Japan, it's there are lots of Buddhism. Now I think that the Buddhism, I don't say the Buddhism. I call it the Buddha path, Dharmic path. Now, Buddha path, the goal of the Buddha path is the cessation of suffering. We call it dukkha, cessation of dukkha, suffering. So we all have dukkha, no matter what we are. Americans, Japanese, Africans, Asians, LGBT, doesn't matter at all.
Right.
We have all dukkhas, sufferings. So the cessation of the dukkha is called nirvanahood or Buddhahood, which is open to everyone. So it's very simple in Buddhism how to end the suffering. Very simple. The first thing is not doing evil. Second thing is doing good. Third thing is purify yourselves. Purify the egotism. That's all. Only three things to end the suffering, to attain nirvana and Buddhahood. So as long as it is helpful for the cessation or cleansing egotism, all ways are very welcome to Buddhism, because paganism, Unitarianism, even Roman Catholics, as long as they do not attach the egotism, all Buddhism, all religious spiritual ways are wonderful in the sense. Actually, there is no distinction, demarcation, division, distinction between humans, because we Buddhists say human beings are only the combination of mind and body. There's no distinction in the mind and body. on earth. In that sense, we are all one, all the same, no distinction. So, I think that paganism or non-paganism are all welcome as long as they try to extinguish egotism, which is the ultimate source of all miseries and tragedies on earth. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful. Very helpful. Very hard to do, but very helpful.
Right.
George or John Gubbings?
I was very interesting for me. I have had no education about paganism,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll leave it at that.
So is there, oh, let's see. Yeah, is there no CUPS chapter or pagan group at the Bethesda?
There is.
Congregation.
We have a Kathleen at our church who is has a small group of pagans,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they do meet for advertise in the church bulletin when they have celebrations of the equinox and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
I will say that within the neo-pagan movement and the Reclaiming Collective in particular, the Reclaiming Collective is now become international, and they offer several times a year in many locations what's called witch camps. And they're like camps that families can go to or other people can go to for a week or so and just practice and learn more about paganism and ritual and do it together. And now whole families are being raised pagan openly. And CUPS supports these organizations, especially in places where it may not be safe.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a growing movement for sure. And and on another note, one of the things that the Pagan Interest Circle did in the early days is we did a film series of any film that had a pagan or magic theme, and we would critique them against what the cultural images were of what witches and magic were, and which were all so very negative and so far from the reality of what pagans and witches do. And it led me to interview some people here in San Francisco. There was for a while there was a center in the Richmond, I believe, that was a group of Satanists, and I was very curious as to, and a lot of people think that the Satanists are pagan. Okay. And really, after talking to these folks, it was kind of horrific. Without exception, in the small sample of maybe 20 people I talked to, they had all come from abusive situations, a lot of them perpetuated by whatever fundamentalist denomination they had grown up in. And so their main tenet was they believed that revenge was acceptable. And also, so they basically reversed Christianity's teachings on its head, and it was a reversal. I came to the conclusion you could not be a Satanist unless you were already a fundamentalist Christian. It was just the other side of the coin. So they weren't pagan at all. But it's interesting that is the image that Christianity certainly had put on paganism that is alive and well in many communities to this day.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I think that's a very important point. And I had to talk about that fairly often in Jacksonville in ecumenical gatherings, because that was the it was that kind of black-white thinking. If you weren't
Mm.
Christian, they had to be Satanists if they weren't Christians by their
Mm.
definition.
Mhm.
Mm.
George, I think you started to maybe say something or ask a question.
Yes, I was in part attracted to the Community Church of New York many years ago because of the UN Global Affairs Committee that was run by a guy named Franz Verhagen, who was a professor. And he was very steeped in the goddess Gaia. And he made very loud noises about how the Unitarian Universalist Association should explicitly recognize Gaia and the importance of Gaia.
Mhm.
And he was basically opposed by the senior minister,
Mm.
for what that's
Mm.
worth.
Mm.
But he was very dedicated to studying climate change and doing lectures about climate change. So his love of Gaia emerged in a very active career in promoting activism and climate change, for what that's worth.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
my experience throughout my congregations that I served, I think, is that the people who were very strong ecologists, very strong wanting to do things about the climate, often also saw Gaia as a very important religious symbol. And Betsy?
No, I was just counting myself among that number. Yeah.
Yeah, me too, I think.
One thing I want to say that I think is still true for a lot of people that become pagans or pagans and witches, even throughout history, have all been sort of like true ones, outliers, not people that were just labeled as witches when they weren't. But and I'm reflecting on my conversations with the Satanists. There were several, notably women, maybe there were four that I talked to when they discovered what true witchcraft and pagan was about, were very excited about it. And they left Satanism and followed a path to paganism, which was healing.
Mm.
Mm.
And,
Wow.
and, you know, it's not a coincidence that witchcraft has a tradition of healers. I'm a healer. I do Reiki energy work and healing with people. And I was doing that before I identified as a witch. I was doing pagan ritual, but this is just part of my evolution. I'm also an energetic healer as well. And witchcraft finds a lot of people, on the edges that have been damaged or broken or repressed in some way and not accepted for who they are. And it's a path of healing and in personal empowerment. And as I'm speaking for myself at this point, but I think it's true of others as well. And I wish more people really knew the true essence of what paganism and witchcraft is about. And thank you for this platform where Betsy and I can present that worldview and that experience.
Well, I'm very grateful to both of you. I think this has been a wonderful discussion. I think it was very empowering for Betsy to include you, Christine, so then you could have dialogue and people could hear, the sense, you're both there in that ethos, but it's not two peas in a pod. You're different in some ways. And I think that's very important.
And
So,
our paths are different. Even though they happened around the same timeline, our paths are very, very different for coming to paganism.
well, we're nearing the end of our time. If anybody has a last comment, or did either Betsy or Christine want to do a closing pagan ritual or saying or something to send us on our way appropriately?
Let's see.
I would just like to say
Kathleen?
thank you both, Christine and Betsy, because you have expanded so well what I've often been curious about and never looked deeply into. You've gone out of your way to really expand my welcoming
Oh,
of
good. Oh,
of your of your own worshiping, which is embraced by you, the UUs as well. So thanks.
Oh,
I want to invite you all to join us for a monthly ritual if you would be so inclined. It's for the pagan curious. Not you don't have to be a pagan to join. We meet monthly on the Saturday closest to the full moon, and our ritual schedule is published on the Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco's website. We have our own section of that website. And we try a couple times a year to do online Zoom rituals. We start.
Yeah, so even people from Maryland and New York State can participate if they wish.
Yes. So we welcome you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will say, and this is how the very last things we say in our ritual. Merry meet and merry part and merry meet again.
Well, I'm going to amend that a little bit. It starts off, it does end that way, but it starts off, may the goddess be in our hearts, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you all very much.
Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Blessings and
Thank you
goodbye.
again.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.